Good afternoon, everyone. This is Harry Haney. I'm with the Supply Chain Center here at Loyola University Chicago, where we bring together the business and academic community to address supply chain challenges responsibly and sustainably. We do that in multiple ways, including having events like this and by bringing companies and students together to work on projects, amongst other things. We're really happy to have you here today, and we hope that this finds you and your families well in this upside down world. I want to share with you too that we will be sending out the recording of this, link to this recording today if you want it. And then please utilize the chat box. We've got many of you have submitted questions ahead of time, which we appreciate. So we'll start with those, but we want to take your other questions as well. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that we're all facing the supply chain challenges really of our lifetimes. And if you think about this in terms of the actions to be taken before and during and after an event such as this, we're going to focus mostly on the during part of this, since that's kind of where we are right now, and as well as the after, with particular emphasis on the resiliency planning, talent management, customer expectations. Our featured speakers today, Abe Eshkenazi, who's the CEO at the Association of Supply Chain Management Professionals, and James MacDonnell, who leads business continuity and crisis management at BDO. And they're going to start off with a few words about themselves and their organizations and their perspectives on the subject matter. So Abe, I'd like to start with you, if you want to kick it off, please.
Thank you very much, Harry, and welcome to everybody on the call today. It wasn't that long ago, probably less than 2 to 3 months ago, that we were explaining supply chain to everybody in the world. In a very short time period, the concept of supply chain has hit us not only in the pocketbook, but in the heart and in the healthcare issue as well. We're seeing the impact of it, both positive and negative. And I think more than anything else, I think we're seeing the challenges associated with a global crisis or a disruption. We've had a number of disruptions before, and supply chains have responded, whether they be environmental or cybersecurity or a number of different disruptions. Supply chains have become a critical part of organizations, and more importantly, a strategic imperative for a lot of organizations. From our perspective, we've started with the supply chain professional, and we've seen that supply chain can make a difference in people's lives across the globe. And so we've expanded our focus as an organization. Ryan, if you want to go to the next slide. To give you a sense of scale that we have as an organization, pick your metric, whether we're talking about members, whether we're talking about certifications or global reach. We're the largest tax-exempt organization right now that represents not only the supply chain professionals, but the industry as well. And more importantly, the consumers and the patients. As we've seen, conscious consumerism and the focus on supply chain has taken an incredible leap, not only during this pandemic, but really over the past 10 to 15 years, where we've seen significant transformation on organizations using supply chain as a strategic imperative. Well, that requires talent, and it requires individuals that have the competency and the capabilities to drive their supply chains. And nowhere is it more evident than in today's environment when we're dealing with shortages in PPE or food, stock, or just traditional paper goods or consumer packaged goods. We're seeing the impact across the globe on disruptions to supply chains, and more importantly, the benefits of an effective supply chain that was in everybody's sort of business model to a supply chain that is struggling to maintain its support and service to the marketplace, specifically on PPE and surge demand that we've seen really disrupting the supply chains. Ryan, if you want to go to the next slide. For our focus as an organization, as I indicated before, we started 60 plus years ago with the supply chain professional and our ops management as of the time. And so our focus was on the individual, that man or that woman who was often not recognized for the role and responsibility and accountability they had in the organization. So we attempted to not only professionalize the responsibility and the role and the career opportunities for these individuals, but we wanted to have them recognized and rewarded for the contributions they make. We thought that was the end of our journey, that as long as we trained and qualified individuals, that we were going to be successful as an organization. What we realized is that it's through the company that we're going to see the impact, that if the individual is prepared and qualified and doesn't perform on the job, we haven't done our job. So we started to take a look at organizational output, and you'll see that we've expanded our reach to not only workforce development, but corporate transformation, as well as the knowledge and the content. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with our certifications. These are industry-leading certifications that are based on the organization's sort of activities. So this is content that is derived from job task analysis from our members, the corporate members that we have. But more importantly, as we started to see the effect of supply chain, not only on the individual, but on the organization, we started to recognize that it's really at the end of the journey that we're focused on, and that's making an impact, not only on consumers, but on patients and the economy alike. And this is where we pivoted as an organization to not only support the professional, that man or the woman, but to increase our focus on organizational impact. And then finally, on the end result, on the consumer, the patient, and the economy and the ecology alike. We've recognized the supply chain can have a positive impact, but it also takes trained, qualified professionals to execute on it. Thanks, Harry.
Thanks, Abe, very much. James, we'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Harry. First and foremost, I'd really like to say I appreciate your invitation to participate in today's session. For a little bit of background on myself, I have been working in the business continuity, crisis management, and risk management field for the last 20 years or so. I currently am a director in BDO's crisis management and resilience practice. For those of you who may not be familiar with BDO, BDO is the 5th largest professional services organization in the world, providing accounting and advisory services on a broad array of topics. If you could please proceed to the next slide. Just to give you a little bit of insights into where I fall within the organization, I focus predominantly on operational risk management, and obviously a huge component of that is supply chain management. And as we move forward during today's conversation, I think it might be a little bit helpful to understand the perspective that we bring. And our goal on behalf of our clients and our stakeholders is that we imagine the role of risk management within an organization, right? Our ideal state is that companies really internalize and embrace risk management as a core function of the business. It is a competency that needs to be practiced day in, day out. And we really look to help our clients build that core sense of risk management as part of the business moving forward. And we generally do that by looking to integrate 4 primary components: the technology, basically operationalizing how you conduct risk management, focusing on effective programmatic design that provides a good return on investment, ensuring that risk management is trained and everybody understands its role in the organization, and by reinforcing this notion that risk should be continuously monitored, updated, and effectively mitigated across the organization. We predominantly provide services in 5 different areas, right? We help design strategy and governance for risk management programs. We conduct assessments if somebody already has one to help give advice on how they could continue to mature their capabilities. We perform program implementation, provide training and exercise, and technology implementation services. This is going to be really, I think, germane to today's conversation because, quite frankly, to Abe's point, we are in a situation in which supply chain is facing pretty significant disruptions from a risk that many would argue has been known for quite some time, but obviously for many companies not effectively mitigated. And there is a lot of questions I feel regarding how companies can better mitigate risks in this new world going forward. Could you move to the next slide, please? As Harry, Abe, and I were preparing for the conversation today, we pulled together our thoughts on what the new normal is going to look like in a post-COVID-19 world. And what we have on the screen here are some of the areas that we see as emerging areas or areas that are going to be massively impactful to supply chain management and risk management moving forward. Some of these may resonate with a lot of the folks on the call today, and I'll just give a quick overview of some of our thoughts on these. I think the first and foremost is that operational resilience mandates for critical suppliers are going to continue to grow. And what I mean by that is that a lot of companies have a desire to not only manage their internal risk, but the risk of their business, but their risk that their business partners present. So you can expect that while it may, a good risk management program or a strong supply chain program may have been a differentiator, now that is going to become expected. It's going to become the standard if you want to be able to do business. We're going to see very, very significant changes to insurance programs coming out of this. I think that what that is going to look like is anyone's guess, but there's going to be some pretty significant changes moving forward. One of the things that we really want to reinforce is that this idea that the COVID trajectory is not going to be globally uniform, right? And I think that we're seeing that right now with Brazil and Mexico and Russia, right? While we, from a US perspective, are starting to think that we might be at the peak and starting to slow down a little bit, clearly other areas are just starting to accelerate in the spread of the disease. So the disruptions caused by the different COVID trajectories are not going to be globally uniform. I think we're going to see an increase in audits of operational risk mitigation programs. The old way of doing business where somebody just says, hey, check this box that confirms you have a business continuity program are going to go out the window. And instead, companies with whom you do business are actually going to ask to do audits of your operational management programs, whether that's business continuity, disaster recovery, crisis management. We're also going to see a pretty significant reassessment of offshoring and supply chain strategies. The old way of doing business and saying, hey, we're just going to move this to this other country because it's a lot cheaper, are going to be under significant scrutiny moving forward. One of the interesting things that we also discussed is that there's going to be, and quite frankly already are, increased expectations of social responsibility by consumers, right? What we're seeing a lot out of not just COVID-19, but crisis management and the way that business has been conducted over the last several years is that both in B2B and B2C businesses, consumers are expecting more from you. And what I mean by that is that they don't want just the best deal. They want to do business with people that are strong advocates for the global good, for lack of a better term. And when we look at situations like, companies retooling factories to produce masks and making ventilators, even though it's not part of their core business, the value of some of those activities has really increased. And then conversely, at the other end, as you diversify your supply chain, there is a very significant expectation that you're doing it in a sustainable and responsible way. We do think that there is a potential that critical industries and manufacturing, especially the 16 critical infrastructure sectors recognized by DHS, there may be a push to onshore or operate within a trade bloc, because that has cascading effects, and obviously not only across the United States for consumers, such as in the pharmaceutical industry, but there's also national defense considerations as well. Companies are clearly going to be permanently changing the way that they operate. I think we're seeing a lot of conversations around this in the news, Twitter saying, I don't care if you never come back to work again, right? Work from home. I think we're going to see some pretty significant disruptions there. And there's a lot of uncertainty regarding government regulation in the future and what that's going to look like. And this involves everything from healthcare regulation to some of the stuff that we just discussed with regards to onshoring. It's quite frankly pretty murky. And I think that over the next year or so, we're going to see some fluidity with the situation with all of these, but this is a pretty good summary of some of the areas that I think that we as risk management and supply chain professionals need to keep an eye on moving forward.
Great, Jim. That's a terrific kickoff for us. I'd like to start with the first question that we have. It's widely anticipated that we're probably going to see another wave or maybe even more of this virus that may put us back into the stay-at-home mode. What do you see, what do each of you see as lessons learned from March and April that companies can take now to make sure that the next time we have to go through a reopening that it's better? And if you could, maybe talk specifically about food supply chains, given what has transpired there and the criticality of that industry.
I can kick off on what it takes to open, and I think what we're seeing is, to Jim's point, it's not going to be uniform. I think you've got to take a look at industry by industry, and if you want to pick out food or pharma or aerospace, I think you're going to see different layers of sort of back to normal or reopening. I think one of the things that has to be paid attention to, and it goes without saying, is on the employee safety. And I think too often we've seen a knee-jerk reaction to get employees back before putting in the appropriate measures into place to ensure employee safety and productivity can continue without a risk of an infection or a spike for that organization. Employers want to be in business. Employees want to work. That's not the question of desire. It's a question of ensuring a safe environment. So if we use that as the first level, or the first test, that you have to have a safe environment, then to your point, Harry, let's take a look at food. I think we're seeing a significant shift in food. It's not a matter of demand. The demand is still the same. We don't see higher utilization of food than we've seen in the past. It's just a different distribution, packaging, and warehousing and logistics requirements right now. So a lot of producers are continuing to produce. I mean, we've seen that a lot of food is going to waste right now because of a highly synchronized supply chain. A lot of the products that are available today were probably planted and or planned weeks or months in advance prior to this. So trying to shift the supply to address a demand shift in terms of location, not in terms of utilization, has been a challenge for a lot of organizations, specifically in the packaging and the delivery of getting those products to the consumer marketplace. So the shift that most supply chains are looking for, and supply chain professionals are looking for, is consistent data in terms of demand, as opposed to the surge demand that we've seen in the initial part of the disruption. I think we're starting to see a little bit more normalization. We saw it on CPGs. We're starting to see the shelves back in stock on those products and services. Supply chains take time to recover. It's, as we've seen the demand signals fluctuate wildly, that it's taking time for organizations, from the producer to the packager to logistics and every player along the supply chain, having to rebalance their operations to address a different market. But yet we're seeing a challenge in terms of not only the product itself, but in terms of variety. So we're seeing maybe less variety than we have seen in a restaurant or in a commercial setting versus a home-based setting. So there are, a number of changes that are going to occur. And to Jim's point, it's not uniform. So where we may see it in meat, we'll see a different response in vegetables. So even in categories within the food supply, we're going to see significant shifts as it becomes a home-based demand versus a commercial, industrial, education-based setting for a lot of the food services that we're seeing right now. Jim?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything that you just said. And, usually I like to make the joke that the worst consultant answer that consultants love to give is it depends. And you're exactly right in that industry, location, there were varying degrees of impact, and I think various lessons learned. I think the few things to focus on moving forward is that for round two, the stakes will be higher, right? There is now, there was a certain degree of forgiveness for companies that struggled during the first wave of this disease. I think that people will be much less tolerant with regards to the potential for a second wave. I think that also when we look at food specifically, there are some unique challenges in that there was increased pressure on certain portions of the supply chain when it was concurrently becoming much, much more difficult for them to operate, right? Because of the clearly the impacts of the disease and a lot of the other pressures that were put on it. So those pressures are not going to go away. And as this draws out over a longer and longer time, companies should really do two things. One, have a formal after action process to capture those lessons learned, internalize them, and put corrective action plans in place as quickly as possible to prepare for the potential of a second wave, but also not have tunnel vision to the point where you forget that just because you're going through one crisis doesn't mean that a second one can't hit.
Yeah.
Right. We now just had the first named storm, right, for hurricane season in North America. There have been a number of companies who struggled from cyber attacks in response to this, from making changes to the way that they're doing business. Every change that you made in response to the first round of COVID has presented a new arena of risks that you need to reassess and put in effective control measures moving forward.
That's terrific. Thanks, guys, on that. What about the talent management side? What steps are you seeing there in terms of, how does this change the strategies for attracting and retaining and training people, and what new skills are going to be needed that but maybe we didn't think that much about 6 months or a year ago?
Let me kick off by saying it's really a bifurcated marketplace right now. Prior to this disruption, we had a virtually zero unemployment. So you had a lot of individuals that if they wanted a job, they could find a job. It wasn't a question of a soft labor market. It was a tight labor market prior to the recession. The displacement that we've seen has been historic at every level in organizations, but specifically for supply chain professionals, this is a very opportune time for these individuals that are already in the marketplace or entering the marketplace. There's a significant demand. There was a shortage prior to this pandemic. Based on our research, we had estimated that there would be a shortfall of approximately 2 million supply chain professionals by 2025. This is only exacerbating a already dire situation for supply chain professionals. Part of the challenge is that a lot of individuals didn't come into a academic setting, specifically schools, looking for supply chain degrees. Oftentimes they backed into a supply chain career from either engineering or finance or a number of different disciplines. So couple a tight labor market with a higher demand today for supply chain professionals, and this is a very positive outlook for supply chain professionals. Now, so that's at the, sort of a career development opportunity. There's significant opportunities for career development. Let's look at the other end of the spectrum, and that is a job opportunity for a lot of individuals right now. There are significant job opportunities, logistics and warehousing and in distribution right now that did not exist 3 to 4 months ago. And organizations are having a significant time hiring these individuals with fairly minimal education requirements for these individuals. They can be trained fairly quickly and get back on the job. So where 2 to 3 months ago, our focus was on leadership and on career development for supply chain professionals, we've now embraced the back to work initiatives. And we're working with the National Retail Federation or the National Restaurant Association on providing basic knowledge on warehousing, distribution, logistics to get people back on the job. I think we've, as I indicated, we've got a bifurcated demand right now. On the entry level, they cannot find enough workers for the warehouses or logistics. On the operational side and the leadership side, the demands on these individuals is only going to increase. And we're talking about, you asked about the competencies, quite a bit more on collaboration, quite a bit more on business analytics, quite a bit more on risk and resiliency that were part of their job responsibilities, but obviously this has elevated their role within the organization. And I do want to emphasize the collaboration. This is a organizational enterprise-wide response that is required. This is not just within supply chain. It has to incorporate and involve your sustainability professionals, your climate change professionals, sales and operations planning, all the traditional roles. But I think you need to expand and have a discussion about a sustainable recovery, not just a rapid recovery.
Mm-hmm. Jim, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think just 3 quick points. I think one, to Abe's earlier point about focusing on the safety, security of your employees, that's absolutely paramount. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but there have been a number of there's been a number of studies that show that your employee retention is better if you have a clear commitment to your employees during a disruption like this, but also that as you are going through the disruption, your employees will do a better job for you, right? If they feel the company realistically has their best interest in heart. 2, I think that in the in terms of just employment in general, there will be some disruption caused by increased ability to telework, right? To work remotely. That will have some impact to salaries and, you know, all the things that are going to flow out of that. And that's, I think, really agnostic to supply chain, with the exception of some of those folks that are co-located with factories, et cetera, et cetera. You can really, another way of saying this is you can probably get cheaper resources in some portions of the country than others. There's going to be some pretty big disruptions based around that. But the third piece of it is that's kind of the elephant in the room, is the fact that we have seeing a lot of companies going into recession prep mode, right, as a result of this. And one of the areas that is usually high on the chopping block is areas that are identified as non-revenue generating, right? And sometimes that includes, you know, risk mitigation activities, et cetera, et cetera. And so there is the potential for restructuring also being a disrupting force. My opinion, and I think the opinion of everybody on this panel, would be that that is a short-sighted view and can actually significantly exacerbate some of your problems, because if a company is already struggling and they end up going through another detrimental significant incident or crisis, that can be the stake through the heart of what is otherwise be considered a potentially viable company. So I think those are 3 big things to take a look at. And just as a sub bullet of one of them is to Abe's point, is that there does tend to be a disparity, especially when it comes to risk management, with regards to the competency at the enterprise level versus the competency at the local levels a lot of time, right? And we tend to, when we operate at the enterprise level, almost have a self-serving attitude, right? And we only take a global or corporate perspective as we move forward and engage with the business. But realistically, a lot of the mega activities are conducted at the local level. So having a process to integrate risk management into supply chain at all levels of the organization is paramount to actually develop an effective risk culture, which I think we saw was a shortcoming leading into this event, and it should be a prioritized corrective action coming out of this event.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I've thought about this a lot in terms of I mean, we're really facing a culture change challenge in these organizations. I mean, it won't be that hard for companies to get religion and then over the next 12 months or so, or even 18 months, but to have this truly sustain, you know, if we get beyond this and things sail relatively smoothly for a while anyway, you know, the natural tendency is to let it slip back. And it's almost like this has got to be embedded as a core culture of organizations, that we are going to be prepared and we are going to take care of our people, and we're going to build our network so that it will withstand shocks. And with that, I'd like to go to the next question about just the restructuring of networks that companies are starting to take a look at. Maybe, and Jim, you mentioned this a little bit in your comments, but maybe is there any more that you or Abe would like to expand upon in terms of how companies are looking at things to really build more agility into their network, whether it's geographically or just sheer numbers, or from a sustainability standpoint as well, to things like access to water and other natural resources. Anything,
Abe, do you want to kick us off, or you want me to
Go ahead,
dive
Jim.
in?
I'll follow up with you.
Yeah, so I think that I'm gonna default back to my lousy consultant answer of like it depends and highly contingent upon the industry and where you operate. But I think that a few lessons that any organization can carry forward is that as you deal with operational risk, one of the terms that we like to use is run it like a business, right? You need to be clear in what your objectives are and how much risk you're willing to take on. You need to have a clear purpose for what you're trying to do and the services that you're providing for the rest of the organization. You need to be clearly differentiated so that people care about you, but you also need to have a strong focus on who your customers are, right? And whether that's inside the organization or outside of the organization. Because a lot of times what we'll see when we look across all the operational risk domains, it's a lot of redundancy in the activities. And when I just say the operational risk domains, I mean, business continuity might be one column, disaster recovery another, product recall another, right? There's a lot of overlap in the activities that they do. And if you don't focus on building efficiency and having a better experience for the plant owners, for the warehouse leads, for everybody that actually matters, right? What you do is you get fatigue, and that contributes to your point about it starts to become lower and lower and lower of a priority. These are not high value interactions that you're having with your stakeholders. It becomes another check the box. It becomes an annoying thing. It becomes, hey, didn't I just do something pretty similar to this with the enterprise risk management program 3 weeks ago, and now product recall is asking me to do an exercise, but I just did an exercise, for the business continuity guys. So deliberate design from headquarters has really, really big impacts in terms of the sustainability of this competency in the organization.
Yeah, let me add on to, I think those are excellent points. I think, among the areas that organizations are going to have to take a much harder look at, Jim pointed out one end of the spectrum, and that's, understanding your customers and truly, embedding yourself in terms of the challenges that they face and how you need to be responsive to them. I'm going to go to the other end, and that's on the vendors. This recovery is going to impact small and medium-sized business significantly more than a lot of the well-funded or reserved organizations at the higher end of the spectrum, the global organizations. A lot of the suppliers are not going to make it, and that is going to require a shift in terms of your supply chain, and not only from a global perspective, but from a domestic national perspective as well. There's going to be quite a bit of conversation about what national stockpiles are needed for the organization as well as for the country. But this has to be done with a perspective towards responding to surges, as well as agility and flexibility in our manufacturing as well as in our supply chains. We're responsive when we see these types of disruptions. To Jim's point, we learn from the disruptions, we put in the necessary plans, we should be putting in the necessary plans on how to respond. The challenge is that the next disruption is not going to look like this disruption, and it's going to be significantly different. So you have to have the various scenarios on what you will do when and if these types of disruptions hit. But with respect to a global supply chain and more sort of onshoring, a lot of the products and services that are now considered within the national security, it's going to take a public and private partnership. This cannot be done on the backs of corporations investing in redundant facilities and or operations that sit idle in case of a higher demand. This has to be consistent within the industries, not just on the back of a particular company or a particular industry. If we would have planned for this accordingly, we would have done it with a public-private partnership. That means government and private industry coming together to recognize that we have a holistic problem. This is not a regional problem. This is a national and a global issue. As we start to see shifts to more onshoring, you're going to see a shift in global trade. Now, how does that fit within a lot of the policy and politics that are being promulgated today to not only protect what we believe is in the national interest, but how does that play within a national trade or in a global trade environment? These are a lot of the TBDs in terms of the decisions for organizations as well as industries, as well as on a national scale. And it's going to take a discussion, at least an opening argument about who pays for these types of redundant and or excess capacities to respond to surges and or disruptions in the supply chains in the future. Investments are required to maintain our supply chains as well as the capacity of industries to respond. This is going to be unlike any other response that we've seen in the past as we start to move down the operational side versus the political side and the global trade.
Jim, anything? Yeah, I agree with everything that Abe just said. I think that really fundamentally, it's to your earlier point, Harry, it's a shift in the risk versus reward equation, right? Things like just-in-time operating, offshoring of capabilities. While there are some financial benefits to these, a lot of times, they also have some correlating risks, and I think that we're going to see a shift in the risk appetite that boards and executives are willing to take on. And I think that one of the big influencing factors, however, that is still, I think, not quite as of yet unresolved to Abe's point is the role of the government and what bailouts, subsidies, every government package that may come through, because that sets precedents for corporate leaderships, and they will operate on the assumption that something similar could potentially be available in the future, when I don't know that that will necessarily be the case, right? So the role of government, to that point, is going to be very influential in the way that boards and executives see this, and then that will obviously flow down to influence the risk appetites and subsequently the business decisions in all industries.
Yeah. Abe, I'd like to just add on to your point about the public-private partnerships and working together, and just introduce a thought there that, as supply chain managers and leaders, I think historically have been very much focused on the job at hand and in our own operations and working with our customers. And I think that we have not traditionally seen it as the purview, or our purview, to be looking at this from a policy perspective. And I think very much that supply chain leaders have a responsibility to do that. And it's going to vary, of course, depending on your industry and the size of your organization, et cetera. Many organizations have government affairs shops if they're sizable enough, but they may not be that well tuned in to how policies impact supply chains. Now, that might be changing as a result of this, but I think it's our responsibility as supply chain professionals to help educate those folks to advocate on our behalf. So I think it's a new area for folks to think about being a part of. I'd also like to just go back to, you mentioned that we're going to see probably some failures and some mergers and acquisitions, and maybe organizations that aren't going to be able to commit to longer term contracts in the future from a sourcing standpoint. I mean, how do you see companies, any comments on that, and how companies are going to be working with suppliers differently in the future?
We've heard from a number of our large member organizations that they have taken an embracement of the vendors, and they're starting to rationalize, as they should have before. This is no different than the evaluations they would have done before. I think it's going to become much more stringent, as Jim was pointing out before, in terms of the assumptions of risk with the vendors that they're working with. So while you may see, a shift in the types of evaluation, I think you're going to see quite a bit more attention paid to downstream vendors, not just tier one, but collectively within the supply chain, all the way to the raw materials. Oftentimes organizations may evaluate tier one or tier two suppliers. I think visibility and transparency across the supply chain is going to be a hallmark coming out of this. And those organizations that don't, but let's put it on the positive side, those organizations that do have visibility and transparency in their supply chain are going to be able to respond and react much quicker, or prevent a lot of the disruptions that are occurring today. This is a hallmark of organizations right now, is the well-running organizations, is visibility within their supply chain to all aspects of their vendors, to the raw materials.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that Abe is exactly right, and I think that you know, we use the term extended enterprise, right? It's not just going to be their vendors, but their vendors' vendors, right? And they want to have a better understanding of where materials are sourced from, the economic viability of all the companies with whom they do business. To my earlier point, I think that we will no longer see just a check the box of, do you have a business continuity plan on contracts? It's going to be, well, we're going to come take a look at it, and we want to see proof that your plan is aligned with ISO 22301 or whatever rather relevant international standards are identified. I mean, I go back to, you know, my prior life when I was predominantly consulting with the federal government, when it became a requirement to have an H1N1 plan in every contract that the federal government deemed is critical. If you don't have a pandemic plan or a pandemic annex, I think that you should be prepared to put one together pretty quickly, because you'll likely see that as a requirement moving forward. So a lot of this we're starting to see right now. I mean, a number of my clients sent out surveys already on, hey, how are you preparing or recovering from this, and what is the viability, and can you provide all this additional information? And as contracts run out, I think it's just going to become much more stringent moving forward.
Yeah. Shifting gears just a little bit, and I'd remind the audience, if you have questions, please put those through. We'll try to get to them. We have just a few minutes left here. We're going to wrap up, but maybe talk about what types of indicators you see companies watching to try to get a peek into the future of potential problem areas. I mean, what kinds of indicators are they looking at today to monitor their supply chains? I realize that's kind of broad, but maybe just some different ones that you're seeing that will spark some ideas in our audience.
Well, I mean, specific to COVID, I think that most sizable organizations with whom I work now have dedicated resources to maintaining situational awareness of everything from transmission rates to government responses to, you know, all of the impacting areas, because they do want to try to get as advanced warning as possible when they may potentially be facing some disruptions. I think the focus right now tends to be on just facility reopening, right? And what are the conditions that need to be met, and what are the warnings and indicators that would cause you to change your plan. I think that obviously with critical factories who have maintained some minimal degree of operating, it's less of a concern. But when you get into some of those non-critical nodes and offices in general, that is a very significant area of focus right now for most of the individuals with whom I do business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let me just layer on to that. A couple of areas that I'm hopeful that we don't lose sight of as we focus on the economic side. As Jim was pointing out, it will be economic first. I mean, viability is, if you cannot be financially viable, then there's no discussion point after that. But I would hope that as the economic indicators are being evaluated, so would the environmental and the ethical indicators be paid attention to as well. We started to see significant push from the Business Roundtable on organizational responsibility to consumers and to social responsibility beyond the economic side of economic goals for the organization. I would hope that this continue to be a critical aspect of organizational sustainability, is that we take a look at not only the bottom line on the financials, but how are you impacting the planet? How are you putting procedures, policies into place to ensure that you don't have disruptions in your supply chain that can be prevented from slave labor, child labor, conflict materials. These are all issues that were being addressed prior to this disruption. at varying degrees by different industries. We would hope that organizations would embrace a long-term sustainable view of recovery, and that it will help organizations respond and defer and or avoid disruptions in the future. A risk and mitigation plan, as Jim was pointing out before, needs to include not only the employees, but it needs to include the financials as well as environmental and ethical challenges that organizations face. Supply chains are not without challenges, and we need to ensure that they are responsible and accountable. Conscious consumerism has only been increasing. I doubt that it's going to go the other way. Individuals, patients, and consumers alike are very interested in the companies that they partner with, and they want to ensure that they are being held to the same standards that they hold themselves accountable to. And so we expect to see more expectations on consumers and patients alike for what's in their products, how did it get there, how long has it been sitting on the shelf. The information is available. We're going to see much more transparency within the supply chains, and that would require organizations to pay attention to the triple bottom line.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Some additional evidence for that. It's been interesting to watch with the market, the ESG companies, environmental social governance focused organizations are faring better than the market overall. So that's encouraging. And maybe we're
starting to see organizations as well, P&E firms, and the PE firms, and Jim, maybe you have a perspective on this as well. They're starting to evaluate supply chain sustainability as part of their evaluation of valuation. And although difficult to estimate the value of it, we sure can estimate the value of a downturn, of a disruption to your brand, whether it be from a conflict materials or a Foxconn issue. We have enough examples of the damage that disruptions to supply chain have on brands. It's the maintaining it is the key.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's no surprise that consumer sentiment in general has gotten increasingly more fickle, and there's a number of factors that contribute to it. And I think one of the ones to reinforce your point is increased expectations of social responsibility. People care more about the core values of the company, but also access to information, right? Stuff that years ago would never have made the nightly news, trends on social media. And I still go back to what was it? I think Snapchat. Caitlyn Jenner sent out a snarky tweet, and they lost $1 billion in valuation in a day. Right? This is not a problem that our forefathers really dealt with. So the truth is that people vote with their paycheck, or with their pocketbooks, and the flash to bang of response to that, in terms of both the rapidness and the severity, is absolutely increasing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a great point. Any other?
I may have gotten the wrong Jenner on that. I'm not exactly a Jenner expert, so it's one of them.
Well, hopefully there's we may have a fact checker amongst us, and we'll let you know if we're called out on that. But any other closing thoughts from either of you gentlemen today?
I'm chagrined that we're having to explain and defend supply chain the way that we have today. I think we needed to do a better job in the past, and I think we have an opportunity today to not only explain, but to have individuals understand the value of supply chain and the impact that it has on their lives. As I indicated before, we've been defending it for a period of weeks right now, but it is responding. It is providing the necessary support for the economy, but it's going to take time. This is not a short-term impact. I would I easily say that I don't know a lot of risk mitigation plans that had a global pandemic in mind. I think most of the risk mitigation plans were either regional or isolated to a particular either organization or facility. It did not have the pandemic pervasiveness that we're addressing today. This will be incorporated it should be incorporated into the new risk and resiliency plans for organizations. Our hope is that, we are, as a community, more concerned about the general population than each of the individuals, and that we have a responsibility collectively to see our way through this. And supply chains are a critical part of it. Our healthcare professionals will get us to a point that we can be a more interactive and normalized sort of social beings. Supply chain will help the economy get back on tracks, and we fully expect it to. Not only the professionals, but the individuals that support every aspect of supply chain to continue to be the force behind the economy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Harry, in terms of closing thoughts, I think I really just want to go back to one of your earlier comments, and that these types of issues tend to be cyclical, and that something bad happens, everybody swears we have to do whatever it takes to make sure this never happens again. Time goes by, middle managers want to save another 0.25%, make some cuts somewhere. Next thing you know, 15 years later, everybody's shocked because, dear God, how did this ever happen to us in the first place? So I would just encourage the group that not just for today, but for next year, for the next 3 years, for the next 5 years, you focus not only on the tactical and detailed manner in which you operate, but also on some of the softer skill components of managing your program. And by that, I mean, you need to effectively market the value of it. You need to ensure that you get senior leadership buy-in into these risk mitigating activities. And you always need to design aspects of your program with an eye towards sustainability and continued growth, right? Sometimes it's a little bit hard to show the value of risk mitigation and risk management versus a year-over-year cost saving. So one of our big responsibilities to the organizations that we support is making that clear and showing the value on a reoccurring basis of the very skilled workers that operate within this field. So that will be the key to actually having this be a transformative issue, because it's pretty easy to say, hey, this is a once in a lifetime thing. Last one was during World War I. I'm not going to have to deal with the next one, but to Abe's point, it's not going to be this. It's going to be something else. Whatever you fully prepared for, that's what's not going to happen. So build a risk culture, build a resilient mindset, build flexibility, build adaptability moving forward.
You guys have done a great job helping us think through the multitude of challenges that we've got. I know that you all have some other resources that are available. Ryan, if you want to flip to those that you want to share real quick with us, with our audience.
Yeah, so related to COVID specifically, we have pulled together a series of free resources at the BDO Crisis Resource Center. This is where we're posting all of our thought leadership on an exceptionally wide array of topics related to COVID-19. And this goes into less so current situational analysis and more towards the impacts on your organization. So I encourage all you guys to take a look, and there are some materials in there that may also help you facilitate conversations with other portions of your business, everything from the implications on taxes to, actually, let's go to the next slide real quick. I'm sorry. I just pulled out some of the titles from the varying thought leadership pieces that we have. Again, this is available to you guys for free and a great resource. So I encourage everybody to take a look.
Yeah, similar. Thanks, Harry. We've provided similar resources for supply chain professionals, both our members and companies and the general public alike. We view this as not only our responsibility as a tax-exempt organization to disseminate the information, but to be a relevant and timely resource for individuals. We've got a lot of opinions on the marketplace. I'm glad that BDO and Loyola and our organization are putting out facts, and I think that's what we need to start with first, is facts. And I think we can have relevant discussions if we all agree on what the facts are and then determine what the appropriate course of action that needs to be taken. So as indicated here, we've got a number of resources available to you. Avail yourself to them. There's between BDO, Loyola, or our organization, there's a whole plethora of information that's available to you. Engage yourself, engage your teams in the conversation, and hopefully this will be a memory in a very short time period.
Yes. Well, thank you all again, gentlemen. Loyola also has materials available. I'll send those out on the email that we send the recording in. Thank you again for your time, and thank you all for being here and sharing an hour with us this afternoon, and hope you and your family stay healthy and safe. Take care,
As well,
everyone.
Harry. Stay safe and healthy. Thank you again.
Thank you again, Harry.